Do you love your creative push? Consider taking 2 minutes to leave a nice review on iTunes. By telling how the show has helped you, you'll help other people find it so they can help them too. If you need some simple instructions on how to do it, head to yourcreativepush.com/review. Thank you in advance for leaving a review, and thank you again to those who already have. Your Creative Push, episode 222.
And I think just to know that when you're going for a period of lack of motivation and you're not being productive, is that you're not the only one.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Mike Koos. Mike is a UK-based designer specializing in web and UI design, graphic design, branding, illustration, and photography. He has a worldwide client roster, and his work is regularly featured in design-related publications. Mike is also a regular speaker at design and tech conferences. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, very well, man. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. So I was wondering, would you mind starting out by kind of sharing how you got into design? Was that kind of something you've always known that you wanted to do, or is it something that you kind of figured out later?
I think I feel quite lucky really in that sense, because I feel like from an early age I was sort of predisposed to becoming a designer or some sort of, having a role in the creative industry somewhere. I always, when I was really young, I used to design sails for windsurfers, and I remember designing trainers and sending them off to Adidas to see if they'd use my design and stuff. This is when I was like 10 years old. So you can imagine what they looked like, those images. But
that's so cool, though.
Yeah, and I just always liked doing that. I always enjoyed doing it. And then I wasn't really thinking about a career at that point. I just did that for fun. But when it came to leaving school, I just automatically enrolled in a graphic design course because it just seemed to me to be the obvious. I didn't even think about it. It was just that's what I was going to do because that's what I did. So I didn't have much of a sort of a dilemma about which path to take. I just went down what felt natural, which was doing graphic design. And after that, after I did graphic design, I actually got a bit bored of graphic design. It all seemed a bit regimental. So I still staying creative, did a degree in fine art and sort of related arts, which was really basically a degree that was made up of, it was mainly painting, but also the related arts section of the degree involved everything from, writing to photography to music to dance. It was just really getting an experience of all the arts. What I found with my painting, though, is I was bringing graphic design back into my fine art painting, using typography within my painting. So the sort of the graphics thing came back again. And I think, and to me, that's where I sort of have always sat as a designer. I've always been in a way, I'd say I've always, at heart, I'm a graphic designer, but I like being creative with graphic design and experimental with graphic design. Hence this mix up with fine art. And then after leaving university, I took a role as a sort of a junior graphic designer for a company called The Body Shop, the cosmetics company. I don't know if you've probably seen it around. And there I was lucky enough, they taught me, the packages like Photoshop and Illustrator. This is back in 1997 now, so it's going back quite 20 years. And that's where I got my sort of skills using, that was the first time I did really use computers properly. Before that, I wasn't really using them. And from the end, at the Body Shop, I developed my graphic design skills. And I've sort of hopped to a couple of different jobs after that before sort of essentially moving into the web in 2007, 2008. And that was when things sort of started to take off for me, really, because the web enabled me to get my work out there, get my work seen, and obviously the perfect platform to attract new opportunities, new business. And I guess it's just sort of all, rolled on from there.
So when you say that you got into the web, you're not talking about necessarily web design at that point. You're talking about kind of just sharing your graphic design work?
No, actually, I am talking about web design, yeah. What happened was I had some clients doing my graphic design, but I kept getting asked to do websites. And I was just like, I've got to... it just dawned on me that I needed to sort of skill up and learn how to build websites. So
You were turning them down at that point, like before that?
Yes, I was sort of like turning them down or getting somebody else in. And it just seemed to me that it was more often than not that I was getting requests to do this. And it just felt like too much of an opportunity to sort of, turn away. So I taught myself to do front-end development, and so I could build websites from the front-end aspect. I still got people in to help if I need to do anything more complex. But the great thing is coming from a design point of view into code is that it was really cool because I had the sort of graphic design skills, and it was brilliant having control of the web as well, because before I'd hand off, designs to other people, and not in losing control at that point was always quite frustrating. Because you didn't, as a graphic designer, you really want to make sure everything's just right. And giving away the design at a crucial moment was, didn't feel good. So learning web design really was an amazing opportunity for me to be able to take control of the web work that I did and also get it out there at the same time. And it was although I am talking about web design specifically, it did marry up with me, I guess, using the web as a tool much more myself, to using all the platforms that were showcasing design work at that time. So yes, it was a bit, in a way, it was combinational. I was also using the web as a tool as well as learning to develop for it all at the same time. And it was that combination, and over quite a short period of time, that I got offered a job for a company called Carsonified back in 2008. Based upon the work that I had done for the web and put out there. And that was brilliant, that job, because they were very prominent in the web design industry. They ran conferences for web designers, and they also, invested in me as a designer, and I got a lot out of that job, and I learned a lot working with the team there, and which really essentially launched my sort of personal career, really.
Very cool. And I'm so glad that you brought up Carsonified, because I have that written down here to ask you about it, because I checked that out on your portfolio, and it's just very beautiful, and it's very simplistic too, and it's in its color palette. Like each page only uses 2 colors basically. So how did that idea kind of come about?
Well, that was it's funny. I mean, that's quite an old piece of work for me now, but I still keep it in my portfolio because it was, I just feel, it's still a strong piece for me. But the weird thing is I had an opportunity when I was there. One of the things I really wanted to do for Carsonified was redesign their site, because it's our company, it was a small company, and I wanted to sort of take, creative control, I guess, of the Carsonified brand, and it was an opportunity. I saw it as an opportunity to just have real fun creatively. So it was quite funny, because when I started that project, I spent a lot of time, because I wanted it to be really good. I procrastinated a lot. I went down avenues with a funny attitude. I was so sort of het up to do this project. I ended up hitting quite a massive block. Suddenly I was like, no direction seemed right. And, I was quite despondent by it, actually. And other designers out there will know this feeling when you have a block creatively, you don't know where to take something, because you feel powerless. It's not like with sort of taking a sidestep quickly. There's 2 aspects to design and for the web. There's sort of UI design, which is much more sort of, your decision making is based upon what's best for the user. And and it's a more functional design. It taxes a different part of the brain. You're creating a layout and a user flow that, if you're filling in a form or you're going through a certain process on the web, the design skills that come into play then are completely different to the ones that you're using to try and tell a story of a brand. And, that creative side, the stuff you use for trying to tell a story of a company through a brand, through its visuals, trying to create a visual identity, that stuff, whilst you can use real facts as your inspiration, as your basis for the work, like the company may have a certain set of values, have certain aspirations, certain visions. You can use all that, and I do use all that to create a design, but there's normally multiple ways in which you could visualize that. And so you can creatively, you can hit a brick wall sometimes. And with this project I was getting quite despondent by it. And one night I was out running. I just ran past this shop in the city, and it was Gap, actually. Gap, the clothing store.
Sure.
Yeah. And they had this massive sale poster in the window. They had like the autumn sale or summer sale or whatever it was. It was just really simple. It just had I can't remember what was on it actually, but it was just like red and had a big white sale word on it, or something. It was just something really simple. And I just had this little penny drop moment. I just thought, yeah, I'll just do literally 2 colours, nothing else. And I went home from that run and I literally bashed out 3 rough page designs. And they were pretty much as they are on this, as you can see in my portfolio, pretty close to that anyway. I just refined the illustrations, but essentially I just sort of cracked it with a penny drop moment, and I knew it was right, and it let me develop the rest of the site in that way, and it was a really successful launch.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. Like I said, that's why I wrote it down. And I think that that's super inspiring, though, for when people get those kind of creative blocks. It's one thing to sit in front of the computer and just hope that inspiration comes, but just getting outside and going for a run. Not just that. That's one really good tip for people, is just to get out into nature or whatever, but also kind of keeping your eyes open and just being willing to take anything in for inspiration. Just like you said, it will be like that penny drop moment, where something will just hit you and be yep, that's the solution. So you have to kind of get yourself out as opposed to just sitting and just beating yourself over the head trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about that is, I think now I'd say, that's totally true. I would, thoroughly recommend that to anyone. But the funny thing is that that's, I guess it's a bit of luck in a way, and it was sort of I guess what I try and do now actually is I do have certain strategies to come up with designs now. When I'm talking about this creative stuff,
Mm-hmm.
When I'm trying to forge a creative direction for a company, I actually sort of, what I do now, and which I'll share with you, is I sort of have in order to gain more control over the creative process and not have to wait for those moments of inspiration, I sort of actually have a bit of a process, and that process is something I've been talking about actually in my recent conference talks. And it starts with understanding the company you're working for and really getting to know who they are, what they do, what their values are, what the long-term vision for their company is, and really what it is that matters to them. Using that information, I try to distill it down to really what it is they're trying to do, or what it is that sums them up. And I essentially create what I would call their movie title strapline. And then that single sentence, whether I use it on the actual site or not, that sentence is really sort of my base point, the foundation for the design. In my portfolio, I think one of the clearest examples of this is a site I did for a company called Mixed. And it's in the second row down on the homepage there. It's the one with the yellow pencil. And they're a web design company. And obviously, if you're a web design company, there are thousands of these companies all over the world. And so how do you distinguish yourself from everybody else when what you do essentially it's the same service someone else supplies, and you need to differentiate yourself in a way, make yourself, help your company stand out and communicate that you offer something special, something different. And through my conversations with their team, I learned that they did a lot of complex work for big organizations, sort of quite detailed back-end technical development work. But they were always keen to come back to this idea that because they did that, they didn't want to lose focus on the fact that they cared deeply about branding and communication design and aesthetic design too, because the whole thing adds up to make a better experience for whoever engages with it. So through those conversations and that, I boiled it down to them to this phrase, beautiful form, perfect function. And for their site, that then became, I just boiled it down to that sentence and wrote, okay, that's the basis for what I'm doing here. And using those 4 words and what it means, that's what I use to sort of really create the visual online brand. If you go to the Mix site, for example, the home pages around it randomly delivers you one of 4 objects that I decided, I felt summed up that phrase. And I'm using a pencil, a spoon, a bicycle wheel, and a chair. And they're sort of delivered with the strap line and a different bold color. It instantly gives you this message, instantly the viewer this message, this statement of intent, sort of their core values delivered to you straight away. Sort of, it's immediately opening that storybook about that company. And then I can use all those images and use that theme and, pull it right through the site. So I can bring the imagery back. I can use text and words that echo this sentiment right through the whole project. And that's really how I approach all of my web design and graphic design work. And it helps me have a more structured approach to creativity that I feel it gives me more control. And, I'm not, hopefully not, I mean, this is not guaranteed, but I'm hopefully not having those, torturous days and then I just can't think of anything. I have a bit more of a system in place that helps me in a way to the solution, a bit more of a structured timeline.
Right. And yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm looking at the Mix site now, and you're right. It does just signal what you're talking about, exactly what the company stands for. And I think that's a perfect tip to get that kind of single sentence. And, while you're doing it for companies, I think any type of creative person that's kind of struggling to find a voice or struggling, they get an idea for a piece, but they don't know exactly what they want to say with the piece, is to boil it down to that kind of single sentence like you're talking about, to figure out exactly what you want to say and have that be kind of your guidepost for, like, as you're thinking about it, as you're creating it. It's perfect advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you say, that you don't actually necessarily even have to use it in your work, the phrase, but it's useful for yourself, if you want to use it. Sometimes I use it, in other projects I haven't used it, but I still used it in the background, as a guide.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned kind of that's one thing that you like to convey as a speaker at events. What are some of the other things that you try to convey? I know that I was watching one of your talks about being the black sheep. I was wondering, could you kind of explain what you mean by that?
Well, this is sort of basically following on from what we're talking about here, really. This was the Be the Black Sheep talk, really. The basis of that talk is, the web is, because it's such an open place and an environment you can share stuff instantly, trends happen very quickly and they're adopted very rapidly. And, in a lot of the web can sort of look the same. And, you've got companies like Squarespace and Wix. They're providing solutions that are getting ever more sophisticated, and they, and a company like Squarespace itself is actually, I would argue that they've actually influenced web design because of their own aesthetic. They spent a lot of time, on the Squarespace branding and the way it looks, and I think that has been quite influential. But I feel like as a web designer, who, like myself, who specializes in sort of both web design, but, graphic design on the web, is that with technologies like Squarespace around, how do we command sort of like a premium price point for our work in the face of that kind of competition? How do our careers survive, through 2017, 2018, 2019, as these other solutions become more sophisticated? And my answer to that is to be the black sheep, is to deliver something that goes beyond what any of these other things can deliver. And for me, that all comes back to being creative again, because creativity is sort of the last thing that computers will steal from us. And so if you can base your career in that bit, my idea, my theory is that you'll last longer as a designer. So that's what I try to deliver for my clients, is something that are not, is to try and be the black sheep and give them an identity that they can own, and something that they just won't get anywhere else. And that is the sort of core message from that black sheep talk.
And then how do people kind of embrace that? Because I think that is completely wonderful advice for any type of creative person, is to differentiate yourself. And I think that sometimes we get influenced by the people that we kind of looked up to, or the people that kind of inspired us to go down this path as whatever kind of creative field you're into. And then the natural tendency is to just imitate them, or just to try to be exactly like them. And it's hard then to kind of find your own type of style. So how do you actively pursue that idea of being a black sheep?
Well, I mean, I guess what I do, I mean, that's totally right. I mean, I feel, to me, there's not even any point in doing design if you're not going to try and be a black sheep in a way. I mean, it's always been, to me, design has always been about trying to find a solution that is not only works perfectly, hopefully, but is different. And because, this highlights the split between the two aspects of design we're talking about here. I always talk about web design from a sort of a creative point of view, but obviously there's a large part of web design that is, much more technical than creative. And so there's two sides of it. To me, the technical side of it, delivering a user experience and a UI that people can use easily and simply, to me, that comes as standard. That is something you need to deliver as a web designer. End of story. But the creative side is much more up for grabs. That's, how you tell the story of an individual, if it's a personal site, whether if it's about yourself, your own portfolio, a company you're working for, a band you've designed a website for, however you do that is down to you. And to me, that quest is the black sheep quest, is to try and do something in that space that just hasn't been done, or at least is, hasn't been, obviously it's hard to come up with something 100% original every time, but I look at every company I work with and I try to create them something that they can own. And so if you look at the Carsonified site I did, it's different to the mixed site I did. It's like using different imagery completely. And if you look in like one of the other sites I've done recently, I told the story of a site called Belief. Belief is a company I designed a website for, who are an organizational sort of culture and identity specialist. And they sort of help companies who are growing, not lose their way and articulate who they are and why it is they matter. And in a way, what Mark does, the founder of Belief, is similar to what I do of design, except he's doing it with companies and people. But, to tell the Belief story, and, I came up with this concept that used a tree as a metaphor for a company that might go through that Belief program that he delivers. And so if you look at the website, which is the one with all the coloured leaves, I went out and collected leaves. I then used ink to paint the patterns on them. I got a cross section of a tree trunk and used all these real world objects and told his story using those leaves. And I've never done that for anyone else.
It's beautiful.
And I probably won't do it for anyone else again. It's just, this is a concept I came up with for his company, and it tells his story. And that's just another example again of, there's probably stylistic elements of it that are, you can see that are me running through it for all these projects, but that's, it's going to happen. But hopefully, my work hopefully demonstrates that I have a different approach to each and every client that I work with. And that approach And the approach is the same, actually. Sorry, the approach is the same, but what I choose to do and how I choose to tell the story is hopefully completely different, because they're all completely different. They all do something different. They all have a different set of values, and they all have different goals. But my belief is that everyone I work with is unique and has a unique story to tell. And that is what I use is my lever to be the black sheep myself. I mean, I use them. I use their story, if you know what I mean. It's in a way, they give me that leg up. I just listen to their story and think of a way to tell it visually that hopefully I feel is, like I said, something that they can own.
Right. I think it would get very boring if you just did the same. I mean, you would just be another Squarespace or another Wix if you just did the same thing for everyone else. You say, here's my portfolio, choose like option 1 through 5. You know what I mean? And I think that when you get you get a client, you get a company that you can kind of see as a blank canvas to like kind of create a new identity for. And I think that that's super inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think the thing is about the thing about web designers is that, if you strip it back a little bit back to, what it is, a layout and content, is that, lots of websites are going to have a similar layout. And I don't feel that layout is much of an issue. If something's got a similar layout, that's no big deal. You're just reading content. You might read 3 bullet points or have a little icon or something. And there'll be visuals and text. That's what it's like reading a magazine from one magazine to another. They look similarish, don't they, in layout?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong in a way. Those sort of web design standards and layout, I don't see anything wrong in that. It's really the content of the site that's up for grabs, and what sort of content, what sort of illustration or graphics or, typography that you use to express whatever it is you're talking about. That's the bit that can really make or break a piece of work for me.
I also wanted to get into your photography, because I've heard you describe your photography as a hobby, but you have over 800,000 followers, I think, on Instagram. So would you still consider it a hobby, or can you kind of tell us how that started?
Yeah, well, weirdly, and I've always had a sort of, again, since I was a kid, a sort of a semi-interest in photography. I was never like crazy sort of into photography, but my dad bought me, he was into photography, he bought me a couple of cameras, sort of old film cameras when I was young. I started taking pictures, and I was relatively interested in it. I took a lot of pictures, and I did get pictures developed. I also sort of joined a photography club at school, and we developed pictures in a darkroom and everything. So I was sort of always well aware of the photographic process, right from taking photographs on an old SLR to developing them in a darkroom. So I had a reasonably good knowledge of photography. And to me, photography was the thing that sort of stopped me taking pictures, was the hassle of all that stuff, which for some photographers will see that as a bit bizarre, because it's that creative process and the making of something that's probably quite important to a lot of people.
Right.
But for me, it was always about more of this sort of, capturing a moment. And so what happened for me is that when the iPhone 4 came out, obviously it had a better screen, had a better camera. That was the first higher resolution screen that came out on an iPhone, and had a decent camera. And, because it was simple, because it was in my pocket, I started to get into taking pictures again. And at that point, even before Instagram, there were a couple of apps that, you could edit your photos in. So I had started taking photos on my phone, and I actually just started posting them to Twitter. This was before Instagram came about. And then very shortly afterwards, Instagram did come out. And I just thought, I'll just use that then. That seems quite good. Yeah. And so I literally on the day it came out, Instagram, I was like, that's cool. That looks pretty cool. You can post photos on that. Which is, rather than posting them randomly to Twitter, I thought this would be nice because they'll all be in a collection, So I just started using Instagram on the day it came out. It was a weird thing. I remember within a week I had like 300 followers, which I thought was weird, and they were all talking about the pictures, and so that was, I guess, it spurs you on, doesn't it? And it was great because the combination of being able to take a picture whenever I wanted on a simple device like a phone, quickly apply a filter or not, and just post it and share it and just build up a collection of pictures was absolutely perfect. It was like all the perfect ingredients for a brilliant little hobby. And since day one, since Instagram came out back in 2010, I've been sort of an avid picture taker ever since and never let up. And I guess what happened is that, after a few months, or I think by the time I got to a year later, I think I had 50, 60,000 followers. I remember thinking something might come of it, and I started to get a few calls, a few emails about coming to do events, and I just started off doing some sponsored work just for free at first, and and then that sort of developed into working with more companies, taking on projects all over the place. I've worked various companies. Done work for Land Rover. I went to India with Land Rover once. I've been to Colorado with Land Rover. I've just done loads of projects for loads of clients, and I love doing it actually because I think people it's a weird thing, obviously, doing sponsored work in your personal feed, but for me, it just gives me something. I love getting a brief. I'm a designer, and I don't know about you, but this is the one thing actually, and I think is very relevant for this podcast about creativity. Actually, is that sometimes it's really hard if you've got nothing to do, and if you go back to people who are starting out, it is hard to just do something. To go, what are you going to do? I don't know. I can do anything. What should I do? I don't know. And so to have a brief is actually really helpful, I think, if you're a designer. I mean, if you're an artist, you can do what you want, and I guess a brief isn't as fitting. But when someone says, right, okay, we're going here, we're going to need 4 or 5 photographs that express this sentiment, it's quite an exciting prospect. I enjoy doing that, and for me, doing this sort of work for companies mixed in with my personal work just brings more variety to the pictures I take and the locations I end up in because of it.
Well, do you find that now, like the two different things, like the photography and the design, are at odds with each other? Like, do you have a tough time deciding kind of which project to take on, or is it just kind of flow naturally? Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I'm still, I'm a designer, and I still see myself essentially, I guess, as a graphic designer. I've just ended up doing, I've ended up graphic design, ended up doing branding, illustration, web design, UI design. It just all grows from one to the other. And photography has always been a hobby. It still is a hobby. I do some professional photography projects, and they don't interfere with my design work. They just sit happily alongside it. I don't do loads. I get asked to do a lot more than I actually do because not all of them are a good fit. That is something else I've been doing. Is also I've done a couple of small photography lectures on mobile photography. I did last year. I did a project with San Miguel, who have this thing called Life Rich Individuals. And it's basically people who are rich. They're people who do interesting things, who are sort of having, are rich in life, not through being financially wealthy, but basically through what they do, the passions they have. And so it's a really cool project. And I was asked to do a sort of a mobile photography lecture at Somerset House in London last year. It was really good. I got to share my passion for taking pictures of people and show them how to do it, show them how I approach editing, the way I think about taking a photograph. And it was really good fun to do it. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed sharing my thought processes behind photography with everyone who came to see it. And it's something I would hope to do more of,
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad that, like you said, it can sit happily beside, what you do. And I think that for a lot of people, they get kind of afraid. They typecast themselves as a an artist or a writer or a photographer or whatever it is, fill in the blank. And then they're kind of afraid to kind of delve into another creative passion. But it is possible to have it sit beside happily, to be able to have have multiple plates spinning. Especially when you can find something that you remember how much fun you had when you were a kid taking photographs or playing music or whatever it is, and then something comes along like Instagram for you with taking photographs to kind of make it super easy. It's like a perfect marriage to just really embrace that and go with it and not really have too many expectations about, what is this going to do for the other thing that I do.
But that's the funny thing, that what you said there I think is really important, and I have this conversation with my friends, my sort of peers in the industry a lot, and what you just said there about not having an agenda. You didn't use those words, but you sort of alluded to the fact that you just start something and you just do it because you want to do it. You just do it because it's another creative outlet, and there's no plan. There's no sort of like, if I do this, I'll hopefully get these kinds of clients. With my Instagram, there was no agenda. There was no plan. It was just like, I like taking photographs. End of the story. There was no other agenda. And actually, to this day, I still don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to build some giant photography business. I still just take photographs because I want to take photographs. And if I get projects in, I get projects in. If I don't, I don't. That's not something I've let control me, if you know what I mean. I still control it. And I think that's a sort of an important thing in a lot of creative things, is that I think the moment you're not getting out of it what you originally intended to get out of it, then it can sort of stray from being a sort of creative passion to something that's not so enjoyable. Because, as you're going through your career, you think, well, what can I do next? You ask yourself this question all the time, and you try and think of things. And I just find that if that way round, it's actually hard to make progress. It's much easier if you're just honest with yourself and go, I just want to do this. And sometimes the thing you want to do doesn't seem to have any, you can't visualize it actually having any sort of, say, financial benefit to you. You're thinking, well, I could do that. It might take me quite a long time. Probably not going to make me any money. But I don't think that matters. I think actually just starting to do it and see what happens is much more important than trying to have an agenda. In a way, I think it's really hard to have an agenda with creative stuff. You just either do it if you want to do it and don't do it if you don't want to do it. And normally, I've heard a few people say this, if you really love something and you get a lot out of it, there's a good chance that other people will as well. For me, that has been the case. The things that I've applied myself to have always just been because I want to do them. And it just seems that normally if I do that, there's something good comes of it. And it's, without having an agenda in place.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's kind of going back to that single sentence thing you were talking about before. It's like, as an overall single sentence for whatever it is that you want to do creatively, it should come from that idea of I'm going to do it because I want to do it, to have that be the driving force that you have in your mind while you do your creative passion. Because as soon as that, like you said, the agenda comes into your mind and all these other kind of questions come into your mind, it starts to spoil that single sentence. It starts to change things and change the direction that you're going to go. So really to just always, approach it with that passion, that love for just doing it because you want to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of when I was younger. I used to play in a band. That was my sort of first love, really, music. And
what you play?
I sing and play guitar.
Nice.
I haven't done it for a bit, but yeah, I used to do it. That was for 10 years actually. But yeah, between the ages of like 16 and like 27, 28, 29, that was really my main thing. And I did do graphic design. But really, in my head, the music was at the top and the graphic design was secondary. I hadn't actually started the web stuff at this point. And for me, music was my main thing. And the funny thing is that when you're really young as well and you've got these aspirations to be like a rock star and you're 16 years old, I feel like I always look back and one of the things that, we did, I always thought I did wrong and our band did wrong is because people start as a young, sort of like, as a young band, you're impressionable, and some people will say to you or listen to your music, you need to try doing this, you need to try doing that. That's what people are looking for. And people, people try, and I think people did listen to some people, and we try to do certain things to our music because we'd been advised to do it. And then after we got to a point, I was just like, screw this, we're just going to do what the hell we want to do.
Right.
And that next record we made was the best one we ever made because there was only one agenda: make a good record. I didn't care. None of us cared whether it went anywhere at all. I didn't care if it, only sold one copy. I feel like, I look back on that as an example of why, when you do something creative, you need to stay true to yourself and the reasons that you want to do it.
Absolutely. Embrace that black sheepness.
Yeah.
To just ignore the other people and do what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we let you go, I was wondering, you mentioned procrastination before, but I was wondering, are there any other things that maybe hold you back on a daily basis that maybe other people that are listening can also relate to that you struggle with?
I guess productivity, the motivation and productivity, I guess, is something that sometimes I struggle with, and some of my peers struggle with also. And I was actually asked recently to write an article about being productive. I've actually been chased up a few times. Are you going to write this article? And I was like, this is fun. This is ironic, isn't it? I'm basically four emails in. Someone wanted me to write an article about being productive, and it's taken them 4 emails for me to write back to them. Yeah, and
Love it.
I think I'm not exactly the right person to do it. So I was in the middle of writing an email back saying, I think we're just going to have to put this on hold. And I literally was halfway through that sentence. I literally did it, and I thought, and I just opened up a text pad on my computer and started writing. And I just started writing. I've been asked to do a post about productivity. I don't know what I can share about this, but I'm just writing this, and I'm going to see what happens. And I guess what came of it is that the article that I wrote doesn't actually share any tips. It does share one tip at the end, which I'll tell you in a minute. But all it does is, I guess, I haven't really got any tips for productivity and motivation in a way. I guess my only thing I'd say to people is that I go through that as well. And I'm sure any other creative person, any other designer, writer, musician, whatever you do, people will go through this. And I think just to know that when you are going through a period of lack of motivation and you're not being productive, is that you're not the only one, And I guess sometimes just knowing that other people are in the same boat is sort of comforting, at least. But the second thing I guess the tip that did come from it was that the end of the article, which took me 10 minutes to write, I just said, stop what you're doing and do whatever just do it. I wrote this article. Halfway through the writing an email back to tell them I couldn't write it. I wrote this article in 10 minutes, and it was because I just stopped doing it and I wrote it. And if anything, I wrote it back in the email. I left the sentence in, so it still said, "Dear Alex, I'm afraid I don't have to put this on hold for a minute." Then it stops and says, "Actually, would you post this?" And I pasted it in underneath.
Nice.
So it's I thought it was quite, I'm sort of like, I think I might ask them to sort of keep the beginning of the email in there, in the post, because it gives it the context of how it happened. But, I think productivity and being motivated all the time, especially for creatives, I think is hard. It's hard to be creative on tap. I don't think there's an exact science behind being creative all the time, being motivated all the time. It's just something I think that we all have to keep working at,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think in your story, even though maybe you didn't think that you did, I think you nailed it, because that is really what it's all about, is just, stop putting things off. And, in the time it can take you to write an email to come up with an excuse that maybe you've had in your head because it's too hard to do. Just the act of opening it up and starting it, like before you know it, you might be done. But just like that, and that's the hardest thing is to just open up that document or open up whatever it is and just start.
Yeah, and it's funny actually. I struggle with. I like doing things like this and sharing my opinions and views and stuff. And but it's also, as well as that, you have this. I think for a lot of people, like for example, writing an article about Because writing's a great thing to do if you're a designer, for example, and putting stuff out there, because people like to read about these things. They like to read about other people's experiences, and it doesn't do any harm to your profile to do these things. But also, I think some people struggle with the concept of being out in the open and putting their opinions on the line. I mean, I know a lot of people don't, but I mean, I'm one of those people, actually. I don't really, sometimes I write things and delete them and just put them away, you know. And I'm not that controversial even, but sometimes I find it a little bit difficult to say what I think other than to my close friends and colleagues. I do think it's, just doing it is probably a good thing, really. You only live once, right?
Well, and like you said, even just doing it for yourself, I think that, I mean, as somebody who likes to write in my free time, it's so important to figure out also like kind of what you think about things, and it's a really good therapeutic way of being able to kind of put your concerns out there. And like you said, you don't have to share it though. Like you can just keep that for yourself, but it's a really good exercise to do. And then if you do think that there's like value in what you're doing, to actually share that, whether if, you know, even if you're an artist who just posts, you know, their work, or a photographer who just posts their work on Instagram, there's not really a forum, like you don't have a blog or something, just add it to the comments, you know, like add it as a kind of caption to like kind of your thought process of as you created this thing. Because I think, and that's the whole reason for this podcast, is that people don't talk about these things enough. And just like you said with that article, just the act of saying, hey, look, I go through this too, like everybody else goes through this too. Just knowing that you're not alone with those kinds of resistances and procrastination and fear of kind of sharing, just knowing that we're all kind of in this together really can be helpful. So to be able to share how you the struggles that you have, or the kind of the opinions that you have, and then see what people think, to have that kind of a dialogue is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
But we certainly appreciate you coming on the show today, and for, you know, sharing your opinions and the things that you're going through and kind of your story. So I really appreciate that.
No problem. I've enjoyed it.
And before we let you go, it's time for what I call the final push. And this is where I ask you to just reach through the microphone and just give your best words of advice to somebody you've already really inspired today, and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Well, I guess I think I would just say, if you're creative and you've got ideas, wear your heart on your sleeve and get them out there and believe in what you're doing. Don't deviate from what it is that you believe is the right thing to do. You know, I think it's easy to sort of back down as a creative person and think that what you're doing isn't good enough, or isn't right, or somebody else's opinion or approach is better. And I think, you know, my advice would be, if you believe in it, you know, go for it. I think you'll see some results from that.
Absolutely. Don't back down.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show and for giving us that push today, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And you can find Mike on his website, which is mikekus.com. That's MikeKus.com. And on Instagram and Twitter, he is Mike Kus. And we'll have that and everything we talked about today linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Mike Kus. Mike, thanks again.
No problem. Cheers.
A big round of applause for Mike. I had such a fun time talking with him, especially somebody that does so many different kind of creative things and is very successful at each of them. A lot of takeaways from this episode, but one of my favorites was that penny drop moment, the story of him going out for a run and getting struck by inspiration from a creative block that he was having. And I think that this is something that we can all relate to. We all go through these creative blocks, and the natural tendency, the thing that we think we're supposed to do, is to sit in front of our computer or sit in front of our canvas or whatever our kind of workstation is, and just try to pound through it, just try to push through that creative block. But what you have to do sometimes is to get away from that workstation, almost as far away from that workstation as you possibly can. And to get out into nature is a huge tip that a lot of people give. It's something that definitely works for me. But not only getting out of the house and out into nature, but also while you're doing that, opening your eyes and allowing that inspiration to come in. But at the same time, the tricky part is to not even think about the problem, to kind of let it hit you when you're least expecting it, like a watched pot never boils, that whole type of thing. It's amazing how powerful the brain is, and it does work solutions to problems while you're not thinking about those problems. And sometimes it works even better because when the solution does hit you in the face, you know that it's the right one because you weren't pushing hard to try to find it. It came naturally, and those are the best type of penny drop moments, like Mike said. And I just loved that last story that he told about being asked to write that article about procrastination and him just procrastinating on writing that article. It was so meta, and I loved it because I've been there. I've had these little kind of micro tasks that I just keep pushing off, and I use so much of my mental capacity to think of an excuse as to why I shouldn't do this little thing right now. And they say that things that take 5 minutes or 10 minutes, to just do them. As soon as you remember that you're supposed to do it, to just do it and get it out of the way. That's the best time management tip that experts offer, is to get those little micro tasks off of your plate and just knock them out right away. And I think that Mike's story is really awesome because in the process of opening that email to make his excuse for why he needs to put it off to another time, he was able to just start it. And I think that is the big takeaway, to just start. It's the hardest thing to do sometimes because the more we think about that starting line, about going through a little bit of mental or physical pain to get a task done or to get a big project done even, that is the most daunting type of thing we could ever think to do, is to take that first step. But really, it is true. Once you do take that first step, once you open the document, once you start typing the words, once you put the first paint to the canvas, once you start playing that first note to write your new song, whatever it is, everything else comes easier after it. So really, whatever you have on your mind now, you know those tasks that you need to get done, you know those big projects even that you need to get done. Turn off the podcast right now and get to that first step. Whatever that first step is, don't even think about it. Just go for it. Just go grab it and start. Stop procrastinating. Stop pushing it off and just get it done. You will feel great after you do. On Monday's show, we have Blake McFarland. Blake is a really talented and unique artist. He uses rubber tires to create these really awesome animal sculptures that are really a sight to see. He also does painting and does murals out of like recycled wine corks. And he is also a pitcher in the Toronto Blue Jays organization. So he really is a guy who has two kind of separate identities, and it was really inspiring to see how he navigates those two identities. And I really enjoyed my conversation with him. But that is for you on Monday. If you need the push again, hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done today and into this weekend. So go and get it done. Don't even think about it. Just get to it. Go, go, go. And we will see you on Monday if you need the push again. I love you all, and we will see you then. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.